Looking into cancer and just going deeper and deeper into these, rabbit trails, it's led me to the mitochondrial aspect. And that is extremely relevant for my next guest, Dr. Laszlo Boros. He is a pediatric researcher on mitochondria and so much more, has an extensive history in understanding science. And so he came on to talk about deuterium, which is a field of study that kind of gets deep. So if this might be too scientific for you, we're going to break it down later into much more digestible pieces. But please try to enjoy and learn a lot from Dr. Laszlo Boros. Dr. Boros, I am so excited to be able to visit with you and just get some of this incredible knowledge and wisdom that you have been able to bring together in some areas that are pretty important. So, cancer brought me to the rabbit trail that is your work. And if you would just give us an introduction to who you are and how in the world you got to talk about something called deuterium.
Yeah. I'm getting a lot of inquiries nowadays, and it seems that deuterium is getting into the front kind of line of discussions. Physicians and curiosity is stepping in, and people are getting more and more affiliated and more knowledgeable in this area of deuteronomics. Now there's a science that I'm going to explain this in very lay terms so you can understand easier this process. But there's now a science, a college course where you can actually study deuteronomics or deuterium kinetic isotope effects in biological systems as based on your biochemistry type of work. Those are very complicated. I'm not going to go into details, but practically I came from the same boat in the sense that, health problems, chronic diseases in the family of my own, obesity, not feeling good, and cancer in the family. My twin brother died of cancer in 2006, and we were identical twins. And to me, it was clearly a new kind of area of applications of health related issues through nutrition primarily, and through that understanding a lot of interconnected areas to light, nutrition, water intake, and lifestyle, exercise habits, just to get more familiar with this whole process of what deuterium and kinetic isotope effects mean for biological systems. And so we are now pursuing I would say, a new era or new times as far as understanding health and understanding just in general well-being or happiness in that matter of how much you know in very simple terms of how to preserve a good balanced kind of health, exercise, demanding physical, mental situations, and how to fit in with a healthy approach. And it seems that deuterium plays a big, huge role in all these areas that we covered. And we have been studying deuterium, which is a heavy hydrogen for that matter. I'm sure your audience, they also have covered some of the other podcasts that I did with other investigators, and I also have some talks and conversations where we cover the biochemistry of it, and I'm sure you're talking to other doctors and scientists who relate their specific information in the context of deuterium. But I'm a medical biochemist. I'm a medical doctor. by training, and I was mostly doing teaching and research at UCLA until 2021. But practically, it's what it is our biological systems all depend on a very fundamental basic function of producing energy for our cells, which is ATP or adenosine triphosphate, and this is done in these very delicate protein nanomotors that are powered by protons or hydrogen. The nucleus of hydrogen, it's a positive charged proton without the electron, and they power these nanomotors. And unfortunately, or naturally, there is a isotopic pair of protons or hydrogen in our environment, in nature, that can also kind of try to fit in everywhere there where a proton can fit in, because deuterium also has just one proton and another nucleoparticle called neutrons. But the proton, because of its positive charge, it can actually attach to the same chemical locations where protons would be binding to carbons, oxygen, or hydrogen, yeah, there are also sulfate and nitrogen binding sites. Most common ones are carbons and oxygen. But the problem with this deuterium or deuterons, which is the nucleus of this hydrogen isotope, is that it's twice as large, and it's twice as heavy as we look at the nucleus. And if it binds to a chemical bonds or a location where hydrogen is supposed to be, then it takes about 8 to 15 times more energy to actually remove it or move around. So it's practically like a glue in your, how can I say, in your parts, that is making things very stiff in the biochemical terms, and it makes things very hard to chemically react. And also these nanomotors, they break as deuterium hit them, and or they slow down, they stutter, and there's mechanical and structural damage. And if that happens, then your ATP synthesis or your energy production in your cells, which has two major kind of ways of how they occur, they slow down, and your cells will eventually die. And when that happens, these cells are taken over by fibrocytes or connective tissue for that matter, and your organs start to have problems, and you develop chronic diseases or chronic disease processes. And also, if you have too much deuterium in your system, then you cannot really respond to environmental stimuli, for example, light, for example, electromagnetic fields and electromagnetic resonance. And it will impact your entire body and organs, how they perform, how they function, and how they can work in a concentrated or in a orchestrated manner. And chronic diseases develop, and the most common diseases are obesity, diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, among others, but these are the most common ones. These are so common nowadays because of the deuterium in food that we call these chronic disease epidemics, for that matter. So it's 60% of the U.S. population above the age of 45 or 50. They have very serious, severe chronic disease problems. And obviously, it also expands to other age groups, and cancer appears in young people. Unfortunately, they are also obese, and they also have diabetes. And they all come down to this proton powered nanomotor functions, if they get stuck, then the cells will develop a process we call metabolic or molecular crowding. So the cells are not able to oxidize, burn completely substrates, and you're going to store those in various body parts. And as a matter of fact, then you're going to have chronic diseases, which we mentioned. And it is so important that now we have applications in almost literally all areas of medicine of how you can overcome deuterium overload and what are the tissue specific presentation of these deuterium related issues that kind of cause a broad range of chronic diseases, but the bottom problem is always the same. It's practically a deuterium overload in specific tissues that will actually damage those organs, organ functions, and as a result of that, there are chronic diseases that you have to treat using certain drugs, but those drugs are not really treating the basic problem or the fundamental problem of deuterium overload. They just kind of try to solve the symptoms or try to kind of control the symptoms. And as a result of that, you become kind of a hostage of the pharmaceutical industry because there's no better way or there is no other solution that they can offer. Now, people who teach, people who research deuteronomics, we have many other ways of overcoming these disease problems, but practically the bottom line or the fundamental problem here is that the presence of this heavy proton hydrogen in your moving protein systems or peptides in your body that will be damaged both structurally and functionally, and as a result of that, you're gonna have dead cells in your organs, and when that happens, connective tissue takes over, fibrosis, chronic inflammation, and and you will develop chronic disease processes. And that's the kind of the short summary of what we are looking at here.
So as you went through that, something that really stuck out for me is with my son, the whole thing there was he came to me one night and he said, "Dad, my pee's orange." And so I went to the bathroom and then it was blood. So he was 5, he was little, and so the next day, we're in the this was late at night. This is the next morning. We were at the children's hospital in the ER trying to figure out what's going on, and I remember standing there when this just group of about 6 doctors and other people came into the room. So I knew it wasn't going to be good, right? Whatever they're about to tell me. And I remember that kind of the lead said, "Come here. I want you to feel his stomach." And so we went over there and we palpated it and he pushed down. He said, "What do you feel?" So I felt, and it was hard, right? It was this hard mass. And so it was kidney cancer. And so as you're talking about deuterium and the firmness and the connective tissue, I can't help but think that this played into that formation based on honestly things that I did and the lack of knowing, like what we fed him. I go back to all the rice cereals because he had reflux. So we were told, we got to thicken his food, he was on formula, not breast milk. So just all these little things that I would assume are going to be high deuterium on top of some other factors, right, that led to that. So what do we need to know in the cancer world about deuterium?
Yeah. So the thing is that we are actually carnivores. Now, so we eat either animals or animal products, like in a good sense, in that so breast milk or mother's milk is practically a well designed, well created, nutritional, I would say, fundamental food source for babies that you should be providing as not formulas, but because formulas have nothing, very little to do with the natural breast milk, like feeding protocols, meaning that really breast milk has over time, as you know, usually babies they wean off, or toddlers they wean off of breastfeeding, like after like 4, 5, 6 months they start eating various other foods, but breast milk is what contains all the nutrients as long as the baby's body size, which is about 9, 10 kilograms by the end of the first year. Then you have to supply additional uh, carnivore food, or food that keeps them in ketosis or in the fat burning state, low deuterium and deuterium control. So actually the kid's body can kind of deposit deuterium to certain body parts, collagen, bones, where structural proteins function. Collagen is one of those, and ligaments to build a sturdy body. And it's the reason why I go to the scriptures to talk about this. The actually the scriptures talk about how the mother's womb can form bones in babies. So these questions are already raised in Old Text and the Old Testament, simply because these have been in the central kind of realm or thinking of even ancient societies, or people who saw these very different tissues being organized. Some of them are structural, some of them are functional, some of them. So a human body, even a baby, has elements and structures that have to be kind of built for certain specific purposes and certain specific functions. And these can only occur and develop if the baby is in ketosis and eats only breast milk product or organic, like biological material, not plant-based in that sense. And it has just the necessary amount of deuterium that is necessary for the baby to develop. Do not overload those systems that regulate deuterium among and between certain body parts, structural, skeletal, uh, um, proteins, and bone structures are different than fast spinning nanomotors in mitochondria. So the deuterium has to be deposited through biochemical processes, which I'm not going to go into much details, simply because those are the job of the doctors and the biochemists who kind of understand those to a point that we can explain certain things. But it's practically like a hub of a railway crossing, or where freeways cross. There are certain directions where certain cars and the trucks have to go certain ways, and the cars have to go certain ways because of, let's say, the border patrol. So practically it's a biochemical hub regulating hydrogen and deuterium to go separate ways and support different body functions and body parts. Now, if you overload the system with deuterium, that means some trucks have to stay on like Freeway 5, and they don't can go up in the hill, which is too steep for them, and they don't go through the tunnel, then they cause problems simply because they are really not designed to be participating in those biochemical processes. Deuterons are not to power those nanomotors. So if you overload the system, then your body is not able to control or regulate deuterium, or prevent deuterium to go to different to tissues where it's not supposed to. And that's most of the time it's through food. It's through formulas that are not designed with low deuterium and not necessarily animal sources, but plant sources. There's a lot of fruits in there which are loaded with deuterium and carbohydrates, and those babies are not kept in ketosis. Unfortunately, they cannot synthesize and produce their own vitamin D, for example, which is very important based on light exposure and low deuterium cholesterol source, which your body can synthesize from the appropriate ketogenic food, which is breast milk for that matter, because your baby is born in ketosis. That means if you measure the baby's laboratory parameters, they have a blood sugar of about 2.9 and a ketone body of like 1 millimole per liter. So that's how the babies are born. It's practically baby's ketosis, and they stay there. In fact, the mom stays in ketosis because of the morning sickness, practically. So the reason of all these metabolic and all these nutritional processes during pregnancy is to keep the mom in ketosis, in low deuterium ketosis, and
Wow.
once the baby is born, keep the baby in ketosis. And in fact, this is how you wake up every day. You wake up in ketosis because you burn fat overnight. The role of sleep in our life is practically to switch into this metabolic ketosis, which is a deuterium depleting process. And when you have depleted enough deuterium, then you are rested, you wake up, and it doesn't take necessarily long hours to sleep. Maybe you can accomplish this in a few hours if you are in ketosis. And these all come into one kind of understanding of how you can actually let your body to regulate its own natural functions with the necessary amount of deuterium that is limited, yet it can be used for structural and for sturdy chemical bonds, but where it has no place, like moving, rotating nanomotors, then just discriminate deuterium from those processes. And you can only do this with natural ketogenic low deuterium animal source, based on animal source ketogenic or fat-based meat and fat-based diets that have the optimal protein and fat content with very little, if any, carbohydrates in them. And it would help your body to allow your body to separate deuterium from hydrogen or protons and deposit those and use the protons primarily for energy production. And when you talk about formulas, when you talk about baby food, if you just look at the bottle, you can see that a human baby would never have what, peaches, bananas, carrots,
Soy,
dried
vegetable
up,
oil.
yes, vegetable oils, which are clearly not our food, uh, considering our microbiomes and our biochemistry makeup.
I know that he also has, some methylation issues based off of, I'm, homozygous on MTHFR on two different, SNPs actually. So I know that he's got at least that. And so then as, we dove in and learned that folic acid and folate are not the same thing. I was dumping folic acid in him through the formula, through the rice cereal. And so, you just find out that the synthetic stuff causes way more problems, as we learn. What you are saying seems to dovetail and parallel the work of Thomas Seyfried like so much as far as the overview, but I've never heard on that a metabolic approach of cancer address deuterium. Is have you ever spoken with Dr. Seyfried at all? Is that collaboration seems to be maybe one of the best things we could do.
Well, we do actually communicate occasionally when there are papers coming out and there are topics to discuss. Actually, he was not the first who described cancer as a metabolic disease. It was a German scientist called Otto Warburg. He observed the fact that tumor cells produce lactic acid from glucose. And then in 1996, I wrote a paper in Medical Hypotheses where I explained how uh, glucose is used in tumor cells and how the pentose cycle, how mitochondrial processes use carbohydrates, in fact, glucose for that matter. We labeled glucose with 1 to 13C, 1 and 2 position with 13C glucose with heavy carbons, and we were using mass spectrometry. So Thomas Seyfried came very late in this game. So his contributions are most related to mitochondrial metabolism and some of those approaches biochemically. He's not a medical doctor; he's a biologist, as
Yeah.
I understand. And we do exchange, scientific topics and questions. We discuss those sometimes, but the detailed biochemical kind of deuterium related issues are more important than talking about substrates in general,
Awesome. I,
because
I
uh-huh.
got one more as you go into that, as because it's really interesting as you follow along. You can take out pieces, and then the puzzle kind of starts coming together a little bit more for somebody, an uneducated country boy from Arkansas, right? Me, as I get to hear from experts in these different fields, it just helps me piece it together. Another aspect, as I understand, hydrogen is unbelievably important, is a connection with melanin and then the sunlight. I know that you have mentioned that a few times, even just as we're talking. Can you help me understand a little bit better of hydrogen and that deuterium depleted water in regards to this energy production and light?
Yeah, sure. So you have to think of hydrogen as the ping pong ball on the ping pong table where carbon and oxygen are playing a game, meaning that they use protons or use hydrogen to transfer energy from water, which is H2O, and it's getting broken by sunlight in plants, and the oxygen is released as oxygen gas, O2, and hydrogen is attached to carbon dioxide, and this is how organic molecules are synthesized. So light comes in, blue light and red light. That's why you see all plants, most of them green, simply because the green spectra arrives to your eyes because plants don't use it, but they capture the red and the blue from the full spectra because they use them for biochemical purposes. With the red light, they break water, and with the blue light, they capture these protons and they attach them to carbon dioxide with the help of this light energy coming from light, different spectra. So, and there are many interconnected connected reactions in the process, but what really matters is that this organic material that plants produce and animals eat them, then the animals can actually burn or oxidize this organic material, produce carbon dioxide, use oxygen, and produce water. So it's the reverse process of all, and this is usually this is the type of arguments that Jack Kruse is using in his um, kind of biochemistry blurs, but those are actually my connections of how we connected those dots and how those are relate to each other as far as producing organic material, then oxidizing organic material, and how there's in and between the two discrimination processes that actually keep your body low in deuterium when it comes to carnivore diet. So eventually, deuteronomics explains the process of how you produce what you use from nature, water, and carbon dioxide, and how you produce organic material that actually you can burn into water and carbon dioxide that you exhale. And this is kind of a circle of life where protons or hydrogen play a very crucial role, because from oxygen they jump to carbons, and from carbons they jump back to oxygen. So it's practically a through photosynthesis, and from photosynthesis to biological oxidation. So it's what you see here is a very fundamental, simple equation as far as biochemistry is concerned, how protons are part of this energy transfer from sunlight to your mitochondria to produce metabolic water. And deuterium depleted water is practically what your mitochondria is producing. So if you don't have mitochondria that are functioning efficiently, then you have to provide this water from an outside source. That means you have to drink deuterium depleted water to actually produce to actually drink metabolic water instead of producing metabolic water, or you actually help your body to deplete deuterium through water if it's not able to produce sufficient amounts, or there are mitochondrial damage, or there are deuterium overloads, there are mitochondrial non-functioning mitochondria in your tissues, in your body. And for that matter, you have to deplete deuterium from the outside. And the fastest, the quickest way to do this is through drinking deuterium depleted water. Then you can actually use carnivore, grass-fed, natural habitat, um, uh, uh, pasture-raised animals, animal fat. And when your mitochondria oxidize those fatty acids, your mitochondria will produce this deuterium depleted water. And you can provide this from outside. That's what deuterium depleted water drinking is. You can actually attach or use this in connection with food, which is natural grass-fed animal fat, if you're on a carnivore diet, and then maybe eat a very little bit of greens with them. But you probably want to stay away from fruits. You want to stay away from high carbohydrate, high deuterium, processed food. Definitely, you want to stay away from animals that are grain-fed or have total nutrition supplements, farm-raised, simply because those are actually sick animals already that have an overload of deuterium. So even their fat is not safe to burn in your mitochondria. So they can actually cause the same diseases as the animals were suffering from. Those are actually biochemical or metabolic diseases that the animals have. And we published extensively on these issues simply because we wanted to understand for ourselves what is the problem with these processed food items. Why do they cause disease in such an epidemical or epidemic scales, for that matter? And the key to understand that is practically their deuterium content. And to compensate for that is deuterium depleted water is the first thing that you want to supply.
What kind of things have you seen with cancer patients that have included a deuterium depleted water, protocol or just utilization?
Gabor Shomiai, I'm not a clinician, so I research and teach these things, but I'm not working with patients directly, meaning that I'm not a clinician in the sense that I'm not directly
Sure.
advising patients. I'm working with doctors who want to learn about deuteronomics and take those to the bedside. But it's Gabor Shomiai, who you heard his name. He wrote a few books about how to treat cancer with deuterium depleted water, and there are protocols that are described in his book of how to use deuterium depleted water and what kind of cancers there are. And those include prostate cancer, lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, I believe kidney cancer, and brain cancer. And I think that the list, there are case reports, and there are also blinded randomized studies. I think prostate cancer, one of those studies relates to prostate cancer, but practically, um, I would assume all cancers eventually could be treated with the appropriate approach.
Two things I'm really curious about is how receptive oncologists have been in your experience, and then on the carnivore. Why do you believe that the proper human diet is going to be more carnivore based, and does eating meat exacerbate cancer? Have you seen anything to that argument, as far as if you have cancer you should not eat meat?
Well, again, um, it's not cancer related. It's your basic phenotype, your metabolic phenotype, your metabolic imprint is what determines what you should eat. Oncologists are, I would say, not too all open to. I mean, most of them I spoke with are not too open for anything other than pharmaceutical kind of interventions or pharmaceutical approaches, or drugs for that matter. So we are pretty much on our own. My identical twin died of esophageal cancer, and I had a Barrett's esophagus, so they were going to send me to an oncologist, and I told them that's definitely not an option, because that's how my brother died, unfortunately, in 2006. So I started eating a ketogenic, animal fat based natural diet, and so far in the last 20 years it worked out pretty well. But it's it's practically what is your metabolic makeup, what your mitochondria is designed to do, and what provides those low deuterium fat sources that your mitochondria's optimal fuel source or optimal fuel is. That's what I'm trying to kind of put into the context of medicinal or medical biochemistry. Um, Apparently, there are plants that are low in deuterium, not fertilized, not GMO, um, with certain amounts you can easily incorporate in your diet if you feel like it, but on a very limited, on a very kind of 1 to 8 basis, because I mostly want meat. It's nothing that I really against of anything. That's what I like to eat, and this is what serves my best health, as I can go through my family history and how I feel, and also there's no day that I wouldn't think about my nanomotors. Pretty much like when you pull to a gas station and you have to pick the optimal gasoline for your car. You could put in diesel, you can put in gasoline. There are different octanes, there are different levels. So you kind of have to do this for your body too, because those are actually nanomotors. They do the same process as your engine does. They burn hydrocarbons. Your car does the same. It uses oxygen from air, it uses spark plug, which is the electron transport chain, and it uses hydrocarbons, which is like organic animal-based fuel, which is fat and oil. So it's practically a very simple. Knowing your body's mechanics is what determines what kind of oil, what kind of fuel, what kind of clean source most efficient fuels you have to put in, and those are animal fat, saturated long-chain animal fat, grass fat with the lowest deuterium possible, because you don't want your gasoline to be low grade, have sand in it, which is pretty much how deuterium acts in your biological systems. It just clogs your engine. It just doesn't let your nanomotors to spin. So all these arguments and all these biochemical reactions that we study, they benefit the most from low deuterium animal burning low deuterium animal fat, as long as their by their function is concerned. And deuterium has to be deposited in structural molecules, mostly collagen and bone collagen, but there are biochemical processes that can separate hydrogens from protons. So that's what the kind of the trick or the secret of health, I believe.
So with how deep you are into the science of how the metabolic aspect of that, how important is this kind of regenerative, localized meat farming to overall health?
Well, that's practically key to your health, for that matter. It's you if you live under the same photon pressure and electromagnetic resonance environment with your animals that you raise and you eat, and the plants that they eat have the same photon pressure and electromagnetic resonance exposure, then you form a fauna or a living um, environment where you can actually use each other's resources, because those plants will use your carbon dioxide that you breathe out, you exhale, and those plants will use your your fertilizers, if you will, that your cows are dropping around the field, and they do know how to take care of their own land as far as their dishes or their pasture behavior or feeding habits are concerned. And you can actually get the best food source, the best energy source, and the cleanest energy source if you eat locally, if you eat known sources, and those have no industrial manipulations whatsoever. And your body knows what to do with those. And again, it's biblical story that, when Noah is coming off its ark, the Lord tells him to eat meat. And that's it's a very logical process in the Old Testament of how these nutritional recommendations or laws are provided by the Lord, and eventually what will settle mankind in a more prosperous way. Because if you look at what happened in the Garden of Eden, both Adam and Eve got crazy after devouring on figs, probably with the highest fructose. Is the worst cocaine addiction that is, when you are addicted to fructose. And that's what the Lord wanted them to be like, not to try that. And sure enough, it needs a new Bible translation, or it needs a new Old Testament translation from the science point of view, which we are doing right now. But actually the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, it has very many scientific and natural science, nutritional recommendation and laws that we should not ignore. And eating.
So how do you balance that? How do you balance this? Because I feel like most anybody that is deep into academia is either atheist or agnostic, or they don't have any. Most this that's probably a too blanket statement, but everything goes back to this evolutionary component from them, and there's just like the Bible and God. are irrelevant to the conversation. How do you balance
Well,
that?
you need to kind of look at the troubles there are now developing around evolution as an idea. If you look at genome research or genome research, there's a journal article that shows that actually it seems like the driving force behind evolution, which are point mutations providing more advantages, characteristics or phenotypic features, is not true. So, as genomics is developing, as genomics is using more and more, I would say, detailed and mechanistic approaches to study evolution from the genetics point of view, it's failing more and more. So you cannot really prove the principles of evolution using genomics research. And and for that matter, you have to explain or look for some other explanations. And the Bible or the old scriptures have, again, some very important crucial guidelines, but you kind of have to look into those details through the eyes of a scientist, not necessarily a theologian. It's not a religious type of approach. Religion has nothing to do with what those scriptures contain. Those are actually very ancient writings. Some of them are inscripted, not even Hebrew, but writing even before Hebrew was. They use these Skida or Skite characters, the Book of Job and the five books of Moses. In the Qumran rolls, you probably heard that they have various
Mhm.
sources of various sources of these scriptures using different writings, and that means this knowledge goes back to very, very, like, early times. The earliest um, archaeological scriptures that we can identify are the discs of Tatar Laka, which were discovered in Transylvania. Those are 7,500 years old, and they already have the chemical symbols of hydrogens, deuterium, oxygen, and carbon. And they also have a triplet, which is a DNA, the triplet code of DNA with even the sugar bone, that 3 comma 5 comma sugar orientation between the bases. Three bases are shown there, which actually determine an amino acids during protein synthesis. And so there are, we actually teach this in the deuteronomics course um, in the Vrije University in Amsterdam. It's probably the most surprising to everybody else that you can actually discover chemical element symbols on a 7,500 years old disk. And I'll
Yeah.
send you the link where you can actually watch these talks. Those are breathtaking
Thank you.
because it's so. I listen. You don't. Um, I've been in academics for as long as I was, like, doing medicine. I'm a teacher and a and a researcher. And I have to tell you that the most fundamental information for me are in these very ancient archaeological findings, and also in the scriptures. That's practically, it requires a new translation or a new interpretation of those uh, laws and those commands by the Lord. They need to be reprocessed for and from the current knowledge of natural sciences as there are. We have to understand how those texts were written, in the sense that those are not details, but those are actually principles. Those are not equations, but more like pictures or some visual or some imagination related based on the text. You have to use your conscious to explain those texts, but those are actually very accurate and scientifically very logical to look at the like how the human body operates, how evolution, if you will, would be fitting in the first book of Moses, which is Genesis. It actually it talks about evolution of, it actually defines species better than Darwin ever did. And you just have to be open-minded. I'm not an academic, so I'm not a theologian, I'm not a religious interpreter of these uh, uh, principles. I'm a scientist, a hardcore biker. I work with numbers. I'm that's what I've been doing through my entire life. But most of the answers are in these scriptures and these archaeological findings, as surprising as it is.
I love that. I love hearing that. I love everything that you just said. Well, what motivates you, and how can we help, and how can we support, and what's next?
Well, I do have a website which is LaszloGBoros.com. There are consultations. Analyze this. You just type in what it is. I think it's very cheap. It's $80 an hour. Any specific question you want to ask, obviously with the appropriate data and scientific literature, we can research those and we can answer those likely. And it's practically just a very interactive way of talking about deuteronomics or deuterium research, and apply this to your own problems. I cannot answer every question, but I'm sure we can talk about everything based on the principles of deuteronomics. And what's really interesting is that we learn from each other, because every new conversation, every new consultation gives me very important information, and it's the other way around as well.
I love it. I can't thank you enough for your time. And, just it takes a lot of work to put out information and package it to where it can help other people. And then so much behind the scenes that nobody will ever know that you have done. But thank you. I greatly appreciate it. And, your work's made a big impact on me as I continue to try to understand it.
Sure.
But thank you again, Dr.
Sure.
Boros.
Thank you so much for talking with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Sowing Prosperity. Be sure to follow along across the social media platforms, including YouTube, and be sure to go to sowingprosperity.com.